issues that have been raised. We talked a little bit about the capacity of the border stations. First of all, generally, except for the McAllen, Texas facilities and some of the temporary facilities, these Border Patrol stations are basically police stations, correct? They're not designed whatsoever to really house any volume of people.
No, not at all, and that I think is the problem, what we're seeing in the overcrowding. They're simply not designed to house the capacity of migrants that they're getting at this time.
Commissioner Morgan, I think we got information from you. The basic capacity of the hard-sided facilities is about 4,000?
Yes, sir, that's correct. And during this time period that the reviews were being done by the OIG, which we appreciate, welcome, and enjoy the partnership. At that time, we reached the highest apprehensions in the month of May, over 140,000. At that time, our detention capacity of those we had in custody reached 19,000, and our capacity was 4,000.
I got 19,699 on June 3rd. And even that 4,000 capacity, is that fire code capacity, or is that just how many we can generally chalk in one facility?
That's all across the southwest border, including the sectors and approximately 70 stations. That's what we refer to as 4,000 to 4,500. We refer to that as a manageable population.
Senator Peters made the comment and asked the question about how has the dollars been spent. It was unfortunate it took 2 months for that emergency funding request to be passed. But you know, my information I've received, I think, from you and others is that prior to the funding, we had about 2,700 unaccompanied children in custody, Border Patrol, beyond 72 hours, up to as many as 10 days, a few outliers beyond that. But within a couple of weeks, we were down to a little bit more than a day's intake, about 300, with an average stay of about 30 hours. Is that pretty accurate in terms of what what the conditions were and what they are currently? Yes,
sir. Again, during the time of the OIG review, we were topped out about 2,700 unaccompanied minors, and today we're averaging the past week between 250 to 300, with less than 20 over 72 hours, and several of those are due to medical conditions.
And the reason you were backlogged so much is there simply wasn't the bed space or detention facilities open in HHS until they had the funding for them,
yes, sir, that's correct. And I think she represented it well, is that we have interdependencies. When it comes to UACs, we're relying on HSS OOR to take those children. And then for single adults and families, we rely on ICE to remove those from our custody.
So Border Patrol had really no option other than to continue to hold those children until bed space opened up in HHS. You couldn't just let them into the communities. I mean, it was you were responsible for them, and you had to keep them in your custody in obviously crowded conditions, because you got 4,000 and capacity of 4,000, and you had more than 19,000 people in custody.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And both El Paso and RGV at the time, and still RGV to this day, they were two of the sectors that were getting inundated the most. El Paso, I'm sure we've already heard, one day, one single large group of over 1,000, of which 90% of them were families and kids, hit the El Paso sector in a single day.
Ms. Costello, I appreciate the fact that you made the comment that the Border Patrol personnel that your inspectors talked to were professional, they were respectful. They were doing everything they could do to take care of these children and family members in their custody, that they've been basically given the responsibility to take care of. Is that accurate?
That's a fair assessment, Senator, and those are our experiences. Obviously, OIG would never discount anybody else's experience, but our inspectors have been doing this for a while and have always encountered very professional CBP staff.
I mean, it's certainly been my experience when I've encountered them at the border, as I've talked to Border Patrol personnel. I mean, they're trying to cope with the situation with as much humanity and compassion as they possibly can muster. So, again, there may be a few outliers, there may be a few instances. We saw the texts or the whatever. Those are obviously unacceptable, regrettable. But the vast majority of the men and women of DHS and Border Patrol are trying to cope with this. I am concerned, in your testimony you're talking about Border Patrol agents becoming ill, the illnesses coming across the border. We have a pretty long list of them. I'm concerned about drug-resistant strains of tuberculosis, those types of things. I'm concerned about Border Patrol attrition. Is that something that you're really taking a look at in your inspections? You know, basically the basic morale of Border Patrol personnel trying to cope with this.
No, morale in and of itself is not a specific focus of our work, but we are looking into the drivers behind that prolonged detention to see, you know, as Mr. Morgan was suggesting, what's going on with ICE and HHS that's leading to some of these problems.
The Commissioner talked about the larger aspect, a dimension that I don't think's reported on enough about, is the whole human trafficking element. You know, we had HSI witness here talking about a child sold for $84. When we were down at the border, a child, a 3-year-old boy, left in a field, his name and a phone number written on his shoe. The fact that we are finding these families in stash houses, they're being beaten, the beatings being videotaped, being sent back to Central America demanding ransom. You know, the involuntary servitude. Senator Portman had an investigation a couple of years ago on unaccompanied children showing up in an involuntary servitude situation in an egg farm. Are you looking at that aspect in the Inspector General's office?
No, not at this time, and we'd have to be careful about jurisdictional issues related to some of that. Having said that, we're very open to considering all sorts of issues on the table, but you know, what we actually have authority and purview over is one of the first questions we ask.
Commissioner Morgan, let me throw it to you in terms of your concern over just basic attrition. You know, I don't think anybody would want to spend the night in those facilities. And I am highly concerned. Again, I went down there and you could see the holding cells for scabies and for chicken pox and for flu. I would be concerned about Border Patrol personnel kind of giving up and trying to take a position elsewhere, either in the federal government or in the private sector. Can you just kind of talk to your general assessment? You've been on the job now for a few weeks of
Yes, sir.
Border Patrol?
Yes, sir, and I harken back to my time as Chief of the Border Patrol in 2016, and I think the IG's report captures it well. You know, the Border Patrol, CBP personnel, all those entities are helping us. They're mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters. What the overcrowding that you see, we have all said that we have to do better, that children and families should not be held in police stations for a long-term period of time. We all agree with that. So absolutely it affects them every single day. I worry about their health and their morale, and I think absolutely it's being impacted. Along with the frustrations, they also know Congress could do some things if they could work together to pass meaningful legislation. That's equally as frustrating for them as well. Right now, though, the hiring numbers for us are okay. They're not going in a downward departure, but I'm concerned about the future.
Well, that's good to hear. I've run out of time. I do want to talk about the solution in terms of reducing that flow, but we'll save that for later on. Senator Peters.